Cast on Freeze along with other meta gems got a big nerf, and if you were playing Cast on Freeze Comet as your main build, then you've been hurt by the latest nerfs big time. If you were using my previous build, you will have gone from summoning a Comet every single freeze to now every 15 to 20 freezes, which is a colossal nerf. Well, lucky for you, I've got the perfect build to transition to. This is my Ice and Fire hybrid build that floods the map with fireballs that freeze enemies and cause huge AoE explosions by causing Frostwall to explode. And yes, you're seeing this right, we're still incorporating Cast on Freeze Comet in this build as well, because it's still useful for certain scenarios I'll explain a little later. The best thing about this build is that it works for both people who are leveling up and people who are already using Cast on Freeze Comet later on in the game as well. This build transitions perfectly from early game Frost Sorceress builds, and if you are already using Cast on Freeze Comet, well, fret not. This build doesn't make you respec the entire passive tree, so you will not burn all your gold. Build link will be in the comments below. So the core gameplay loop of the build remains pretty simple. We use Frost Bomb to apply cold exposure to enemies, which lowers their defenses massively against cold damage. It also explodes after a while, applying freeze buildup and damage. We use Frostwall, which will create these huge ice crystals, which when destroyed causes huge AoE damage. Hint if you use it against larger enemies which can't be blocked by Frostwall. Like most bosses in PoE 2, the Frostwall is actually instantly destroyed, causing huge damage and freeze. So spamming Frostwall can be an amazing way to DPS bosses. And then previously we used to spam Frostbolt, so we could freeze everything and trigger Cast on Freeze Comet. Well, now instead of spamming Frostbolt, we spam Fireball. Fireball with the right support gems can bounce all over the map to do huge AoE damage and break the Frostwall, which creates even more damage. Both Fireball and Frostwall are unlocked by a level 9 skill gem, so they both can be unlocked pretty early on in the campaign. So this is a great build to level up from Act 3 all the way through cruel difficulties as well. I still use Cast on Freeze Comet because on stronger enemies like rares and bosses, Cast on Freeze still provides you with a good chunk of energy, so you trigger Comet fairly regularly on beefier enemies, which is still good. On weaker enemies, yes, there has been a big downgrade, but I'll show you with the right passives, we can refund a ton of our meta gem energy, so we can trigger Comet a decent amount still for clearing trash mobs. Let's go over our skill gems. So the first skill to go over is Fireball, and when you're low level, you'll have access to 2 support gems. The first one you want is Scatter Shot, which means Fireball fires an additional 2 projectiles. And the second one is Unleash, which gives you 2 free casts of Fireball every 2.5 seconds. When you get a little bit higher level and unlock level 3 support gems, you'll want to incorporate Wild Shards, which gives you a 20% chance to fire an additional 8 projectiles in a circle. This is what triggers when you see me flood the map with fireballs. I've actually even put a 4th support gem here, and that's Arcane Tempo, to reduce the cast speed by 25%. Fireball does have a slight wind-up time before you fire it, so being able to reduce it as much as possible is really useful. Then we have Frost Bomb. Frost Bomb we've changed over from my previous build guides. I've had to move over Spell Cascade to Frostwall because Frostwall does the heavy lifting for damage now, so we need to focus on juicing that up as much as possible. So now we focus on creating one big Frost Bomb instead. Magnified Effect makes it 40% larger. Strip Away makes Frostbomb's exposure have 30% increased effect. Remember, exposure, unlike penetrance, can make an enemy's resistance lower than 0%, so this is why Frostbomb is so good at priming enemies. And then my third gem is Fast Forward, which basically speeds up the detonation timer before Frostbomb goes off. This means enemies have less time to move away from the original position you place Frostbomb. For Frostwall, the most important support gem is Icicle. This reduces Frostwall's life so it's easier to destroy and causes that AoE explosion. Then I'm using Spell Cascade. This means that one cast of Frostwall now creates almost triple the amount of ice crystals. That's great because we're relying on Frostwall explosions to really juice up our damage in this setup. Concentrated Effect makes the Frostwall explosions 40% more damage, but the radius of the shatter effect is lowered. This isn't too big of a loss because we're making so many more crystals to compensate with Spell Cascade. Hypothermia is our main debuff primarily for bosses. It's a curse, so again can lower an enemy's resistances below 0%. Here I've put on Heightened Curse for a greater effect, and Persistent so it lasts longer. And then you can see I'm still using Cast on Freeze Comet. I've put Spell Echo so that when it does trigger, 2 comets come down instead of 1, and Impetus so we gain more energy every time we freeze an enemy. Comet may not trigger as much whilst clearing trash mobs, but it certainly still is effective against bosses and stronger enemies. Let's go over the passive tree. As you can see, I've kept most of it the same from my previous Cast on Freeze Comet video. The only mandatory node is Shattered Crystal, which reduces our Ice Crystal's health by 60%, making them much easier to destroy and cause that shatter damage. I still highly recommend getting these initial nodes for Energy Shield, Cast Speed, Cold Damage, and Freeze build-up. We still get Exploit the Elements, so enemies are damaged more when frozen, and I'm still getting overexposure because we want to lower our enemies' resistances as much as possible. The cold cluster of nodes here, Endless Blizzard, Glaciation, and Inescapable Cold are all very powerful. Then coming across, I've picked up Climate Change, so 25% of our cold damage is as extra fire damage against frozen enemies, which is very useful when using Fireball. Ether Flow solves most mana issues with the build when moving around, and then we also have Arcane Intensity, which helps you scale your damage based on mana. Eventually I will want to stack more mana and possibly switch to a Mind Over Matter build, and then Arcane Intensity will be even more powerful. Now some of the main differences in this passive tree are on this right side here. Before, I stopped at getting this 8% energy node, which was required to trigger Cast on Freeze on every single freeze. Now I highly recommend getting all of these nodes, including this Energize node here. Energize gives us 50% of our Metagem energy back if triggered. So you can trigger Comet sometimes back to back pretty fast, even against trash enemies. I've also come down and gotten Careful Assassin for more critical hit chance, which yes, does work for spells, I've tested it. Thin to Ice, which boosts damage against frozen enemies, and Heavy Frost, so my hits ignore the elemental resistance of frozen enemies. You'll notice on my tree I do have a few strength nodes here, and I'll explain why in the next section. So moving on to our gear. Gear is more important for this build setup than previous setups, and it's because of one item, the Blue Flame Bracers. What these do is that they convert all of our fire damage, so all of our fireball damage, into cold damage. So now Fireball can apply Chill and Freeze as well, and it benefits from all the cold benefits our build has. Remember, we are debuffing our enemies' cold resistances by a lot, so this unique really does make Fireball much stronger. Don't worry though, it's not a necessity by any means, and for leveling especially you won't need it, but it is an aspirational item to chase, especially when you're approaching the end game, so do look out for it on the trading website. You will notice that this item has a 30 strength requirement, so I changed a few of my passive skill tree nodes to strength to accommodate this item. The other thing you can do is look out for an amulet with strength implicit, but if you don't have an amulet with strength, don't worry, just change a few more nodes on your skill tree. For your weapon, previously we were using a weapon with plus levels to all cold skills, but now we want plus levels to all spell skills because Fireball doesn't benefit from cold skill levels. The other stats are similar: spell damage, cast speed, spell critical hit chance, or then that gain damage as extra, ideally cold damage, but the other elements aren't too bad either as an affix. For your armor, I highly recommend getting movement speed on your boots. It really does make the gameplay faster when you're leveling or more towards the end game as well. Then for the rest of your armor, you want to look for resistances, maximum life, maximum mana, and energy shield. If you're pushing the end game, you do want to be looking out to cap out all of your 3 main resistances. Take advantage of these Artificer's Orbs to socket armor, so you can socket runes in order to improve your resistances. This will really help you to survive. Remember, if you need any currency, use the trading website, which seems to be much cheaper, or you can use the currency exchange if you're short on time. So there you have it, my fire and ice hybrid build that will help you transition from your old, now defunct Comet build into a very strong and usable build. This will also take you from Act 3 if you're leveling all the way to maps with ease. If you found what I talked about today useful, remember to slap the like button and subscribe to the channel for more PoE 2 builds. I'm Mr. Ronnet, and that's it for today. Peace out, guys.